Good evening, listeners. Welcome to this week's 10-minute news roundup, where we dive into the most significant U.S. financial, political, and global stories shaping the world as of May 7th, 2025. From trade wars to papal conclaves, it's been a week of high stakes and shifting dynamics. Let's get started with the financial headlines. U.S. financial news. The U.S. financial landscape this week has been dominated by President Donald Trump's ongoing trade policies, particularly the escalating tariff war with China and the Federal Reserve's latest moves. On April 2nd, Trump announced sweeping global tariffs dubbed Liberation Day, which initially wiped trillions off the stock market. This week, markets showed mixed reactions as U.S. and Chinese officials prepared for trade talks in Switzerland, led by U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent and Chief Trade Negotiator Jamieson Greer. Bessent tempered expectations, stating on Fox News that the talks aim for de-escalation rather than a major deal. Despite this, Wall Street stocks rallied on Friday, May 7th, buoyed by strong U.S. jobs data showing 177,000 jobs added, surpassing estimates of 133,000, and signs of potential tariff negotiations. The S&P 500, however, halted its longest rally in 20 years on May 5th, as Trump's remarks offered little clarity on a China accord. The tariffs' ripple effects are hitting industries hard. Ford Motor Company fell over 2% in stock value after suspending its 2025 guidance, citing supply chain disruptions from tariffs. Philips reported a $340 million cost impact, underscoring the strain on global firms. The U.S. agricultural sector is also reeling, with soybean, corn, and beef. Exports slumping due to reduced trade with China. Posts on X highlight additional measures, like Trump granting relief to automakers and closing the de minimis loophole, which allowed low-value imports to evade tariffs. These moves aim to protect domestic industries, but risk higher consumer prices. Meanwhile, the Federal Reserve left interest rates unchanged on May 7th, with Chair Jerome Powell noting increased uncertainty in the economic outlook. Political pressure is mounting, with Trump and Bessent criticizing the Fed and urging pre-emptive rate cuts. Gold prices, a barometer of economic unease, edged lower, but are set for a weekly loss as trade tensions slightly eased. Investors are awaiting Powell's press conference for clues on future policy as inflation concerns linger despite a reported drop to 2.4% in April. These developments suggest a volatile financial road ahead, with tariffs and monetary policy at the forefront. U.S. Political news. Politically, the U.S. is navigating a turbulent start to Trump's second term. His tariff policies, while financially significant, are also a political lightning rod. The Senate GOP's success in protecting these tariffs, as noted in X posts, reflects strong party alignment, but public sentiment is mixed. Polls cited by The Guardian show plunging approval ratings as fears of inflation and economic slowdown grow. Trump's April 2nd tariff announcement, initially celebrated as Liberation Day, is now seen by some analysts as an overreach that rattled allies and markets. Protests, like a May Day rally in Washington, D.C., calling for the return of deported migrants, highlight broader discontent with Trump's agenda. Trump's administration is also making waves with executive actions. An executive order requiring truck drivers to speak English, mentioned on X, aims to streamline logistics but has sparked debate over its practicality. Meanwhile, Trump's nominee for Social Security Administration Commissioner, Frank Bisignano, faced a Senate Finance Committee hearing, signaling a push to reform entitlement programs. On the foreign policy front, Trump's decision to skip Israel during a Middle East trip next week, focusing instead on Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the UAE has raised eyebrows, especially as discussions about a U.S.-led post-war Gaza administration circulate. A controversial move in cryptocurrency is drawing scrutiny. Trump, his sons, and envoy Stephen Witkoff launched World Liberty Financial, a crypto firm where the Trump family holds a 60% stake. Critics, like Danielle Bryan from the Project on Government Oversight, argue this exploits weak ethics laws, blurring the line between public office and private gain. These developments paint a picture of a presidency moving fast but facing growing resistance both domestically and abroad, as it reshapes policy and tests political boundaries. World news globally, the week's biggest story is the 2025 papal conclave at the Vatican, where 133 cardinals are meeting to select a successor to Pope Francis. This is the first conclave with fewer than half the voting cardinals from Europe, reflecting a shift in the Catholic Church's global footprint. Key issues include the church's stance on LGBTQ Catholics and whether it will continue Francis's outreach efforts. Cardinal Michael Czerny emphasized the unique challenges of 2025, stating, "This is not a political convention. The outcome will shape the spiritual and social direction for 1.4 billion Catholics worldwide." The U.S.-China trade war remains a geopolitical flashpoint. Talks in Switzerland this weekend mark the first attempt at a tariff truce since the trade war intensified in April. Both nations have imposed steep tariffs, 145% by the U.S. on China, or 125% by China on the U.S., disrupting global supply chains. The talks, involving China's economic czar He Lifeng, are a critical test of whether de-escalation is possible amid a geopolitical blinking contest. Elsewhere, the U.S. and Ukraine signed a minerals deal, and the U.S. approved $360 million in military aid for Ukraine, including F-16 support, signaling continued support against Russia. Other global stories include Romania's presidential election rerun, where nationalist George Simion led with 40.96% in the first round. His campaign, critical of aid to Ukrainian refugees, has raised concerns in Washington and Kyiv, especially after U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance criticized Romania's earlier election annulment. In Mali, political activities were suspended ahead of protests, and India's foreign minister pressed U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio on justice for Kashmir attackers. These stories underscore a world grappling with trade tensions, political upheaval, and shifting alliances. Conclusion: that wraps up our report for the week of May 7th, 2025. From U.S. tariffs shaking markets to Trump's bold political moves and a historic papal conclave, the world is in flux. Stay informed, question the narratives, and join us next week for more. This is your News Roundup. This is Blake signing off. Deep Search Think Edit Image.